Here are the top 12 mistakes that every single student makes on the SAT that is costing them points. Now, the last tip is probably one of the easiest ones to fix, and it doesn't actually require any math or English or fundamentals or testing strategies or anything of that nature, and it's the easiest one to implement, and it probably gets them an extra 20 to 30 points on every SAT. So to get this started, the number one mistake that I see is on the math, when students make easy and simple mistakes in early module 1 on the easy/medium questions. Now, the reason this is so detrimental towards their SAT is because when SAT sees you making easy mistakes on the easy/medium questions, SAT is then going to say, okay, well, since it's an adaptive test, I'm not going to give you the harder module 2. I'm therefore going to give you the easier module 2, which therefore caps the score that they can get for the math section, and it kind of puts a limit as to how high they can get. So if they get the easy module 2, then maybe their score range can be from 500 to 600, even if they get 100% correct on module 2. Now, those easy mistakes that happen early on, it's usually from working too fast, not double checking what the question is actually asking for, things of that nature. So really just slowing down and being mindful of those early questions that really dictate the module 2 that you're going to get is super, super critical to how students do on the SAT. The second tip that I see all the time is not utilizing Desmos enough on the math section. Now, the reason I say this is because, I mean, yes, you can have a very smart and intelligent student that can do every single question on the math, and that's great. That's awesome. But implementing Desmos is one of the biggest time savers. Solving a problem mathematically versus solving it on Desmos makes the world of a difference in a timing aspect. And if you can shave off 30 seconds per question, and maybe there is, I don't know, say 20 questions on the test that you can plug into Desmos, I mean, that's 10 minutes that you're saving. And 10 minutes can really, dictate whether or not you're getting an additional 30 to 50 points because you're able to solve an additional 3 to 4 difficult problems towards the end. The third mistake that I see is spending too much time on one question. SAT averages out to 1.59 minutes per question, right? So I see it all the time where a student spends 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes on one question. And the reason is they're doing the problem. The solution is on the tip of their tongue, and they know that they know how to do it. But it's not coming to them, and they don't want to move on simply because of the fear of missing out on that question, especially when they know that they know how to do it. But by spending that long on one question, they're playing catch up for the rest of the test. And by playing catch up, you're going to miss every single question along the way. And we never want that. So you always want to give yourself a hard max per question. I recommend that max to be 3 minutes. Unless, of course, you get extra time on the test. Fourth mistake that I see on the SAT is weak or rusty fundamentals. What I mean by this is SAT is composed of all the math between pre-algebra and algebra 2. So that's 4 years of math, and you just got to remember everything in between. All the methods, formulas, theorems, everything of that nature. As long as you have that refreshed for the test, it's really going to help you out with a lot of questions. Probably, I want to say the fifth mistake is going to be not recognizing patterns. There are so many patterns that happen on every single test. And these patterns can be wording, vocabulary, formulas, methods. A lot of times there's certain words that SAT uses in their question which automatically tell you exactly how to get the problem started. And failure to recognize these patterns is probably costing students anywhere between 30 to 50 points per test. The sixth mistake that I see all the time is messy work. And what I mean by messy work is not having all the steps of the problem organized. Now, the reason this is so important is because SAT math really tests students on multi-step problems. Sometimes I've seen it, there's 6 to 7 step problems. And if you're going through 7 whole steps, then step number 6 requires the answer that you got in step number 3, and your work is not organized, you're not going to be able to find that number. So I see it all the time. Messy work costs students 20 to 30 points on every single test. So having it in bullet points or in numbers or just in sections and you box them off, whatever the case may be, whatever helps each individual student is going to be super, super important to make sure they're actually implementing that organization onto their test. Number 7 for one of the top mistakes that I see is not actually reading what the question is asking for. Now, what I mean by this is maybe the question is asking for the value of x minus 1, but as you're going through the solution, you end up getting that x equals 29. And a student gets x equals 29. They see that answer A is 29. They get super excited because they see that synchronicity, right? That it matches. So subconsciously, it feels like they're doing it right. So they choose A and they move on. But the question was actually asking for x minus 1. So failure to double check what the question is actually asking for can really cause you to make a couple simple mistakes every single test. Now, this is a really common trick that the SAT uses, and SAT does this all the time, to where they have an early answer that you find among the solution show up as one of the answer choices to try and trick you. Super, super common by the SAT. You see that all the time. Number 8 is not listing out all of the information in the question. Now, what I mean by this is essentially take inventory of what the question is giving you. They're going to give you certain criteria, certain rules about constants, certain formulas, certain numbers, whatever the case may be. List them out and take inventory. Now, the reason I say this is because there's so much noise in every SAT question. So much chatter, so much blah, 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 blah. Things that you don't need to know. Now, SAT does that on purpose. They want to give you excess information that you don't need to know. So taking all that information out in an organized fashion, having everything listed out, having all your inventory allows you to reference it. So maybe you'll get to a point that you have 4 pieces in your inventory. You've used 3 of them. You don't know how to move forward. So then you look at it and you're like, well, I've not used this one piece in my inventory. Chances are I should probably use that in my next step. A method like that can really help students understand what that next step is going to be. Mistake number 9 that I see is overuse of the formula sheet. Now, the reason I say this is because there is literally nothing on that formula sheet. There's 4 things. There's going to be areas, which chances are you probably already know them. Pythagorean's theorem, chances are you probably already know it. Special right triangles, sure, flip back to the formula sheet for it. And number 4, volumes, sure, flip back to the formula sheet for it. Now, the reason I say that it's a mistake to overuse the formula sheet is because by constantly flipping back to the formula sheet, you are messing with your focus, you are messing with your flow. So you go to the formula sheet, you read the whole formula sheet, it's not there, go back to the question. When you go back to the question, you need to reread it. It takes you another 15 seconds to get back into the flow of the question. You do that over and over and over and over, and it's really going to mess with your focus and really eat up a little bit too much time on this test. The 10th mistake that I see is test anxiety. Test anxiety is going to make your actual performance not show up on the real SAT. The real SAT is not going to reflect where you're actually at because of test anxiety. I've seen it all the time. The student walks into test day too nervous, too many emotions, and they end up scoring total composite 200 points less than where they're actually at. So how do you bring down test anxiety? There's a lot of things. The number one thing is going to be simulating real test conditions. For example, a lot of my students do their homework at 2 p.m., but the actual test is at 8 a.m. So that's a little bit of a shock to the brain when they go and they start testing at 8 a.m. Another one is my students will only do the math homework, where instead they should be doing the entire test, because by doing the entire test, you're simulating what that entire test is going to be like. You're building that mental stamina to get ready to go into test day. So building those mock tests at home and taking as many of them as you possibly can is really going to familiarize yourself with it, so that when you go into test day, you're like, oh, this is another practice test. I've done a million of these. Another thing that's really going to help bring down that test anxiety is just going to be some mental work, really just adopting the mindset of, hey, this is another practice test. This is easy. This is not going to make or break my future, even though SAT has granted a lot of importance on it and really determines what college they're going to get into. Adopting a mindset of, hey, it doesn't matter that much, always, always, always makes my students actually do better. That mindset might seem counterintuitive, but like I said, I've seen dozens, if not hundreds, raise their SAT score simply by adopting the mindset of, hey, this is casual. This is not that serious. I'm just going to go in and do as good as I can. And that's it. The 11th mistake I see is mental fatigue. Now, it's over 2 hours that you're sitting there and testing and using your brain to its maximum capacity and performance. So mental fatigue is a real thing. You're going to get an hour and a half into the test, and an hour and a half into the test, you're now in module 2 of the math section. Module 2 of the math section is the hardest module. It's the hardest questions on the whole test. And that's where you need to be thinking the clearest and to not have that mental fatigue. And that's really going to hurt some students. So to build that mental stamina, it's going to require a couple of things. One is really going to be those mock practice tests that you can do at home to familiarize yourself with it and really to just kind of train your brain to test for that long. Another one could be timed exercises. For example, I do this with my students all the time. I give them a homework, or we do it in the session where it's 5 hard questions in 5 minutes. On the real test, it averages out to 1.59 minutes per question, but by having them get used to doing 5 questions in 5 minutes, it gets them used to testing under that pressure. So by the time they get to the real test and they actually have 1.59 minutes per question, all of a sudden it seems like too much time and it seems easy. So that's one way to combat that. The last and final mistake, the mistake number 12 that I see students make is poor test day habits. For example, going to sleep too late the night before, going to sleep too early the night before. I've seen students go to sleep at 8 o'clock because they want to go to sleep early, but now they end up waking up at 4 a.m. because they got their 8 hours of sleep and their body was rested, and by the time the test rolls around at 8 a.m., they're too tired. So go to sleep just a little bit earlier than you would normally, but not too early. The day before, that Friday before, do not study. Do not study. It's like an athlete. What does an athlete do the day before their big game? They rest. They take a day off so their body can recover so they can walk into their game day fully refreshed, recharged, clear-headed, everything. On the morning of, I always recommend wake up 20 minutes earlier than you actually have to. In those 20 minutes, what I recommend for students to do is, number 1, take a walk. Take a walk around your neighborhood. Make it a brisk walk. Make it walk just a little bit faster than normal. The reason is that early sunlight is going to start your circadian rhythm, and it's going to get your body flowing. It's going to get your mind flowing. It's going to wake you up and charge you for the day. There's a lot of scientific studies behind this. And another one is obviously the walking, and walking a little bit faster, not essentially a slow walk. It's going to get your blood flowing, which in turn is going to get your serotonin flowing, your endorphins flowing, everything needed for performance, for focus, for endurance, for everything of that nature. Come back, eat a breakfast. Always recommend that you eat a breakfast. Nutrition is so important for the brain to perform at its maximum capacity. Now, the breakfast that I recommend is going to be eggs and fruit. I don't want students eating Pop-Tarts, waffles, pancakes, cereal, anything of that nature. Anything that is too processed, that is going to be absorbed by the blood too quickly, is going to give a spike in blood sugar, and then an hour later, that crashes, and that crash is going to happen right when they sit down and start taking the SAT. We don't want that. We want stable energy, and that stable energy comes from what I recommend, eggs and fruit, just very clean, whole foods. Now let's talk about caffeine. Caffeine is a big no-no, and the reason is when you take caffeine, you get a little bit jittery. And I see this for my students all the time. They have some caffeine, they start trying to do some problems, and they're a little bit all over the place, and they can't keep their work organized, and they're reading faster than their brain is actually working, and that causes simple mistakes. And also with caffeine, you get a crash a couple hours later. And we don't want that crash happening right before Module 2 of the math section, one of the most important sections. So definitely limit caffeine. If you really plan on having caffeine, have some hot green tea. That's going to help. That has a little bit of caffeine, but it's also going to keep you calm and stable. And then the very last thing is, what does every athlete do 30 minutes before their big game? They're stretching. They're warming up. They're practicing their movements, whatever their movements may be. They're getting themselves into the flow of things. You as a student should be doing the same exact thing. 30 minutes before going into the SAT, that is when you're going to pull up your formulas, your theorems, get some scratch paper, do a couple of problems, warm up before actually going into the SAT. Put yourself into the flow before actually sitting down and starting off cold, kind of like a cold start. That's it. Those are the top 12 mistakes that I see every single student make on the SAT. Fixing these 12 mistakes, I've seen anywhere from 50-point jumps to as high as 150-point jumps simply by fixing these mistakes. If you really go in depth on all of them, and I mean you're going over all of your fundamentals and everything, I've seen as high as 200-300 points. So definitely take these into consideration. They make the world of a difference on your SAT, and can definitely positively impact your score. So if you like the video, be sure to comment, like, and subscribe.